On December 25th, 2025, in the southern Caribbean Sea, while much of the world was absorbed in the holiday, 3 Venezuelan warships made a calculated move. At 3:41 p.m. local time, radar operators aboard a U.S. Navy vessel watched it unfold live. 3 surface contacts that had been holding parallel tracks shifted course almost in unison. Their headings angled inward, their speed picked up, and their formation drew tighter. This was no accident. Christmas Day offered the perfect timing. It was the kind of moment when watch rotations are often lighter, when global attention is scattered, and Venezuela understood that. Inside the Combat Information Center, the report came in short and exact. 3 Venezuelan naval vessels, coordinated course change, reducing distance. No panic, no shouting, only confirmation, because at sea, intent is not announced. It is revealed through motion. These ships were not simply passing nearby. They were not trailing at a comfortable distance. They were moving directly toward the U.S. ship. The American response came at once, but without drama. No evasive turn, no increase in speed, no hostile maneuver. The ship stayed on course. That decision carried weight. In international waters, staying predictable can be a form of control. The first side to hesitate often gives the advantage away. The captain knew it. So did the Venezuelan commanders following the situation on their own screens. The distance kept shrinking. 24 nautical miles, then 22, then 20. The Venezuelan ship sent nothing. No AIS, no bridge-to-bridge communication, no explanation, only steel hulls advancing with clear purpose. The first radio call went out. Venezuelan naval vessels. This is a United States Navy warship operating in international waters. State your intentions. No response. The ships continued forward. A second call followed, this time in Spanish. You are conducting unsafe maneuvering. Alter course immediately. Still silence. At that point, there was little left to misread. 3 warships, coordinated silence. A direct approach toward a U.S. Navy ship during a global holiday lull. This was not careless seamanship. It looked more like a measured test, chosen for a precise moment. Inside the CIC, systems continued to come online with quiet efficiency. Long-range optics fixed on the approaching vessels. Every shift in bearing, every added knot of speed, every second without a reply was recorded and time-stamped. And still, the American ship held steady. No theatrics, no show of force, only discipline. Because in moments like these, especially when the other side may be counting on distraction, the most powerful response is often composure. As the Venezuelan warships pressed closer on December 25th, one thing became obvious to everyone watching the tactical display. This was not really about navigation. It was about who would break first. The approach did not look dramatic, but its meaning was hard to miss. 20 nautical miles, 19, 18. On the surface, there was no sudden burst of speed, no reckless turn, no obvious display. Just 3 Venezuelan warships maintaining a steady pace while subtly refining their geometry. It was careful and controlled, the kind of movement designed to remain deniable right up until the point it no longer could. Inside the Combat Information Center, the picture became sharper. The lead Venezuelan ship remained on a direct intercept path. The other 2 edged outward by a few degrees, widening their spacing while still pressing forward. To civilian traffic, it might have looked routine. To a naval watch team, it meant something very different. This was not a full encirclement, at least not yet. It was a positional setup, one that narrowed maneuvering options and pushed the U.S. ship into a tighter decision space. The American response stayed exactly the same. Course steady, speed steady, posture neutral. That restraint was intentional. In international waters, every course change can be read as a signal. A turn away could be interpreted as backing down. Picking up speed could be interpreted as escalation. Legally and tactically, the safest move was to do neither. The Venezuelan ships kept closing, 17 nautical miles. No radio traffic, no courtesy call, no navigational explanation. By now, the silence was sending its own message. The officer of the deck ordered another hail. Venezuelan naval vessels, you are closing distance on a United States Navy ship. Recommend immediate course alteration to avoid unsafe conditions. Only static came back through the CIC. The closest point of approach was recalculated again. CPA now 5.2 nautical miles. That number drew quiet focus across the watch floor. Below 5 miles, intent becomes hard to conceal. Below 3, it becomes impossible to explain away. Electronic support measures began recording passively. No jamming, no warnings, just listening. Radar sweeps from the Venezuelan ships appeared from time to time, low-power surface search mode. They were observing, measuring, refining. Long-range optics pushed in tighter. Activity on deck was now easy to make out. Sailors moved topside with helmets on. Several figures gathered near the forward gun mounts. No weapons were actively manned, but no one was treating this like an ordinary transit anymore. The captain watched in silence. He had seen this kind of pattern before, not in these waters and not on this date, but in the method itself. Pressure in the gray zone, close enough to provoke, controlled enough to deny. 16 nautical miles. The Venezuelan lead ship nudged its speed up only by 2 knots. The other two matched it moments later. It was a small change, but it cut down the timeline. CPA, now 4.1 nautical miles, CIC reported. At that range, the encounter was no longer theoretical. If either side misread speed or angle, the margin for error would vanish quickly. Everyone in the room understood something else too. December 25th was no accident. Lighter holiday watch rotations, less global attention, a carefully chosen opening. The US Navy ship did not answer the speed increase with one of its own. Instead, the captain gave a quiet order. Shift to heightened awareness, bring additional sensors online. No alarms, no loud announcements. From the outside, the ship looked unchanged. Inside, it was already preparing. On the flight deck, the helicopter detachment moved with calm efficiency. Power connected, systems warming, crews strapped in. It was not a launch order, not yet, but readiness was no longer just a precaution on paper. Inside the CIC, the watch team tracked every shift and bearing with near-surgical precision. The Venezuelan ships held formation, still closing, still silent. CPA now 3.6 nautical miles. That number settled over the space with weight. Below 3 miles, explanations fall apart. Below 3 miles, events move quickly and records start becoming history. Even then, the American ship stayed on its line. This was not stubbornness, it was doctrine. The goal was not to dominate the moment. The goal was to make the other side take the next step where every second, every movement, and every choice would be captured on record. The pressure had already been applied. Now the question was whether Venezuela would push even farther or recognize just how visible the gamble had become. By the time the range dropped below 3 nautical miles, the encounter had entered a different category. At that distance, intent could no longer be brushed aside as coincidence or poor navigation. Every shift in bearing was intentional, every extra knot carried weight, and every passing second was being logged. Inside the Combat Information Center, the mood stayed calm, but the pressure was unmistakable. Watch standers delivered short, exact updates, eyes locked on tracking plots and optical feeds. CPA, now 2.9 nautical miles, still closing. The captain listened without saying much. He did not need more data, he needed the right moment. In modern naval operations, response is not defined by speed alone. It is defined by timing. The Venezuelan ships kept their formation. The lead vessel stayed on an almost direct intercept path, while the 2 ships on the flanks continued applying lateral pressure, enough to tighten the maneuvering space without crossing into an automatic escalation. It was controlled pressure, clearly intentional. Then the captain made his call. Execute presence measures. The phrase was simple. What followed was not. Inside the CIC, the transition happened immediately but without chaos. Active sensors were brought online. Precision tracking remained restrained, but high-resolution optics locked firmly onto the lead Venezuelan ship. Electronic warfare systems stayed quiet, ready but deliberately untouched. This was not about projecting threat, it was about eliminating ambiguity. On the flight deck, the helicopter crew got the order they had been expecting. Engines came alive, rotors began to turn. The aircraft lifted cleanly, rising just enough to clear the ship before settling into a low, controlled orbit off the starboard side. No dramatic climb, no aggressive movement, just a clear, visible signal. From above, the helicopter's sensor package went fully active. Infrared imaging cut through glare and distance. Electro-optical zoom brought the decks of the Venezuelan ships into sharp view. Heat signatures, movement on deck, command activity, all of it was now being captured, time-stamped, and geolocated. The helicopter edged laterally into position, close enough to leave no doubt, far enough to remain professional and measured. Then came the next move. A green targeting beam appeared, steady and precise, fixed on the bridge windows of the lead Venezuelan ship. It was non-lethal and physically harmless, but impossible to misunderstand. Inside the Venezuelan bridge, the reaction was immediate. On the helicopter feed, crew members paused for a moment, then moved with purpose. One sailor lifted binoculars, another stepped back toward the interior. The beam reflected clearly off the bridge glass. At the same time, the helicopter transmitted on open maritime frequency. Venezuelan naval vessel, this is a United States Navy aircraft. You are conducting unsafe maneuvering in international waters. Your actions are being recorded. Alter course immediately. The message was repeated in Spanish. This time, the answer did not come over the radio. It came through movement on the CIC display. A small but critical change appeared. Contact reducing speed. 26 knots dropped to 24, then to 22. Seconds later, the two flanking ships matched the change. Their wakes shortened as engine output eased. The tight geometry that had been building pressure began to open up, angles widening just enough to break the intercept posture. There was no sudden turn, no dramatic retreat, just a careful, measured step back. The helicopter held position with sensors fixed and the green beam steady. It did not pursue. It did not crowd. It simply remained there, watching, recording, and waiting. At 2.7 nautical miles, the lead Venezuelan ship adjusted course by only a few degrees. But that was enough. It was no longer holding a direct intercept line. Inside the CIC, the update came quietly. Contact is no longer reducing CPA. That was the turning point. The challenge had reached its peak and then started to break. The helicopter made one final pass, wide and deliberate, giving clear visual confirmation of the change in posture. Then it turned back toward the ship, climbed smoothly, and returned to the flight deck. Rotors slowed. Wheels touched down. The aircraft was secured. The U.S. Navy ship had never changed course. It had never changed speed. The Venezuelan warships were still visible on radar and still within sight, but they were no longer closing. Their posture had shifted from pressure to observation. No shots were fired, no direct escalation followed, but the result was unmistakable. The U.S. Navy had not created control through open threat. It had created clarity through presence. Quietly, lawfully, and with every move documented, it had drawn a line the other side could no longer pretend not to see. In modern naval encounters, that is often how control is established. Not by the first strike, but by the first side that refuses to flinch and makes the other side understand it has been fully seen. Inside the Combat Information Center, the first sign was not visual. It showed up in the numbers first. CPA increasing. That single update confirmed what everyone already felt. The geometry had changed. On the radar display, the track of the lead Venezuelan ship began to drift, only a few degrees off the U.S. Navy ship's heading, but enough to alter the outcome. The two flanking vessels matched the adjustment, widening their spacing and letting the lateral pressure fade away. Speed filled in the rest of the picture. The lead ship dropped below 20 knots, then 19, settling into a steady transit pace. The other two followed. On the optical feeds, activity on deck shifted as well. Sailors who had been positioned near the forward mounts stepped back. Helmets came off, some leaned casually against the railings. The change in posture was clear without a single word being spoken. The decision had already been made. On the bridge of the U.S. Navy ship, there was no visible reaction, no order to pursue, no shift toward a more assertive stance. The ship continued forward on the same course, engines steady, as if nothing unusual had taken place. That restraint was intentional. In situations like this, overreacting can undo everything. The goal was never to put the other side on display. The goal was to resolve the situation without creating a new one. Inside the CIC, threat assessments were quietly lowered. Systems remained active, but the intensity eased. The closest point of approach continued to open, 4 nautical miles, then 5. The Venezuelan ships were still there, maintaining distance, but their posture had fundamentally changed. They were no longer shaping the situation, they were responding to it, and that difference mattered. The helicopter footage was already being processed and archived, every frame aligned with radar tracks and navigation logs. If the encounter were ever reviewed, the record would be clear on its own. The U.S. Navy ship maintained lawful transit. The Venezuelan ships approached with intent and after clear signaling, chose to step back. No interpretation needed. Out on deck, sailors returned to their routines. No announcements, no visible sense of release. The watch continued as normal because in many ways it was normal. Encounters like this are becoming more common. Naval forces operate closer than ever, and messages are often delivered through movement rather than words. Pressure builds quietly, and just as quietly, it disappears. What made this moment stand out was not how it started, but how it ended. No weapons were used, no boundaries were crossed, control was never lost. The Venezuelan Navy applied pressure. The U.S. Navy answered with calm discipline. And when that steady resolve met the situation, the pressure dissolved on its own. By the time the distance stretched beyond 8 nautical miles, the encounter was effectively over. The Venezuelan ships moved toward the edge of the tactical picture, still visible, still observing, but no longer influencing events. The sea returned to its earlier calm. The horizon looked exactly the same. But for those tracking every movement, reading every number, and marking every second, the takeaway was clear. At sea, strength does not always announce itself. Sometimes it is measured in small changes of heading, slight shifts in speed, and the confidence to stay your course when someone else expects you to react. And on December 25th, 2025, that confidence brought the situation to a close, without a single shot. By the time the distance opened beyond 10 nautical miles, the outcome had already been settled. The 3 Venezuelan warships still appeared on radar, but they were no longer shaping the situation. Their tracks now ran parallel instead of crossing. What began as a coordinated approach had faded into distant monitoring. To anyone outside naval operations, it might have seemed like nothing really happened. No shots, no alarms, no dramatic turns caught on camera. But at sea today, decisive moments are rarely defined by spectacle. They are defined by who manages escalation and who is forced to stop pressing. On December 25th, 2025, Venezuela appeared to test a familiar assumption, that timing could create an advantage. A global holiday, reduced attention, the expectation that a U.S. Navy ship would choose caution over resolve. That calculation did not hold. The American response was not built on aggression. It did not depend on threats or overwhelming force. It relied on procedure, documentation, and disciplined restraint applied at exactly the right moments. Every movement was logged, every bearing shift was recorded. Every second was preserved through radar tracks, optical imagery, and flight data. If the encounter were ever reviewed, the record would leave little room for argument about who acted within the rules and who applied the pressure first. That matters because incidents like this are no longer rare. Across the world's oceans, naval forces are operating in what many strategists call the gray zone. Not peace, not open conflict, but the space in between. In that environment, the objective is not to destroy an opponent. It is to pressure them into a decision they cannot easily defend. That is what made this episode significant. Venezuela could have continued closing. It could have tightened the encounter further. It could have pushed the situation higher. But doing so would have meant accepting the legal, political, and military consequences in full view. Instead, it chose to step back. The U.S. Navy did not prevail by overpowering the other side. It prevailed by making further escalation both unnecessary and difficult to justify. By holding course, staying professional, and refusing to surrender control of the narrative, it turned pressure back on the side that initiated it. That message reaches well beyond the Caribbean. It signals that international waters are still governed by law rather than intimidation. That timing and distraction do not create special exceptions. And that attempts to apply pressure without accountability can be answered with calm discipline instead of impulsive reaction. Inside the ship, the watch carried on as scheduled. Crews rotated, logs were completed. The helicopter detachment finished post-flight checks. The mission itself never changed because it never had to. Transit, presence, stability. This is what maritime power looks like in the modern era. Not dominance for show, not restraint born from fear, but control anchored in discipline. The next encounter may not happen on a holiday, and it may not involve the same players, but the pattern will likely feel familiar. A close approach, silence, pressure, and then a moment when one side must decide whether to keep pushing or pull back. The real question is not whether these situations will continue. They will. The real question is how they should be answered. Should the United States respond more forcefully to challenges at sea, or is restraint the more effective tool in a world where every move is tracked, replayed, and judged? Tell us what you think in the comments. If you found this analysis useful, subscribe for more breakdowns of real-world naval encounters through modern doctrine and operational behavior. And if you want to support the channel directly, consider joining the fleet. Because far from the headlines and holiday noise, the most important decisions are often made quietly. One course line, one heading change, and one moment of resolve at a time.